joining me as always, everybody. Karlie Bliss is my guest here today. Karlie, introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karlie Bliss. I am a mom of five from Philadelphia. I have been in the agency space now for several years, over 6 years, but have been in the lead gen space, particularly in software, for over 10 years now. So my passions outside of my family are lead gen, and how to really build and scale successful sales teams, whether it's SDRs, whether it's AEs. How do we create repeatable and predictable pipeline and revenue regardless of the environment?
Great. And this is probably the most common challenge that agency owners, probably at any size, I was going to say new ones, but I think probably at any size face, is like that repeatability and predictability of a pipeline. So let's talk about that. But let me put a pin in that. I want to ask you how you got into this world. Like, what of agencies? When was your first job with an agency? And tell me a little more about your background there.
Absolutely, yeah. So I kind of fell into sales, as one does. Many moons ago, I spent some time in retail, and then I don't know, anybody who's worked retail out there, when you got to work overnight and you got to put a new floor set together, that's hard, and did not want to do that anymore. And so I put myself out there for an SDR role, and I guess 15 years later, here I am. I actually, like I had mentioned before, I started in the software space, and so I sold, managed a team of AEs, and was incredibly just drawn to lead gen, really initially to feed my AEs. At the time, I was working for a company called Click. Shout out to Click. If anyone knows out there, ClickView, ClickSense, it's a BI tool, competitor of Tableau and Microsoft BI out there. And at that time, sales development was a new function. It was a new concept. And we as sales leaders were not as intrinsically involved in where the leads were coming from, what it looked like. And so I decided to bridge that gap, got involved with marketing, and really started to really learn and own that world, and helped my team to create effective prospecting strategies, everything from cold calling, emails, LinkedIn. We used to run our own webinars, which was super cool. So I would invite some prospects to a demo webinar where I would just be demoing and have all of them in there and set it up as a webinar, just, creative things like that. We did a lot of gifting. And that's really where my love of lead gen kind of came and was born. From that point, I really started to build and scale SDR teams. So I went into, SDR, being an SDR director, and through that world, was very successful and was actually recruited to come to an agency. And I was really excited about it. It was new. It was different. I was immediately smacked in the face with the concept of selling people as opposed to a product, which is very interesting, but very different, right? I can't demo my services capability like I could demo a tool. And I built an SDR motion within this agency. Now, the exciting part about it, I just did what I knew, which was sales structure coming from the SaaS world. There's a lot of sales enablement within the SaaS world around structure and repeatability. And so I just built the thing I'd built before, but didn't realize at that time that wasn't common in agency world to have a SDR and an SDR engine there.
I think this is great. And actually it brings up a really good question that I'm going to pause this because I know a lot of listeners will be non-sales people. So you and me know SDRs and AEs and how that structure works. Give me a rundown of what that looks like. Again, I've worked in SaaS before and software before, not in sales, but next to salespeople. So I know how that model looks. But a lot of agency owners, like you said, that this isn't something we take for granted in agencies. So tell me how that structure works typically and what the SDR does, what the AE does, how those roles differ, a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So SDR stands for Sales Development Representative. You might also hear them referred as BDR or Business Development Representative. Different SaaS companies call them different things. Essentially, it is the first person that a prospect is going to engage with from your company. So think of them as your champion, as that guide that says, hello, we're interested in chatting with you. And there's typically two types of SDRs. The first is an outbound SDR that's really focused on going and convincing or selling to prospects for them to meet with either the SDR or an AE, which is an account executive. That's our seller. And I'll get to that in a second. The second type of SDR is an inbound SDR. And so when marketing is doing its marketing thing, generally provides different types of inbound leads, whether it's content downloads, whether it's webinar, registrants, attendees, and of course, demo requests as well, which is our highest intent inbound lead. An inbound SDR typically responds to those requests and qualifies them. And then the account executive is the seller. So in a lot of SaaS organizations, we've got these two critical sales development reps that are really managing inbound leads and going and finding more leads on the outbound side. And then they pass it over to the account executive who runs the structure of discovery, some level of pitch in agency world, right? That's an audit, that's a strategy, that's a tactical pitch in some way, depending on your agency type. And then they're running that to the end and actually closing the business.
Love it. That's a great explanation and overview. I think one thing that, again, I'm asking these questions because these are questions I had to kind of learn the hard way of not knowing, right? And what I found is really, I did not expect is that sales is not one person in one role that you go in and say, hey, go do sales for my agency, right? It is multiple different types of roles ultimately. So there is the SDR, there's the account executive. Sometimes you get role compression. Those two people are the same, but you just have to be intentional about knowing they're going to be doing two different kinds of functions. And then the other thing I found that was really again, kind of something I'm learning is like you need a sales manager as well. And that person is, again, slightly different in their skill set and incentives and the things they think about day to day than the AE or the SDR. Again, maybe let's talk about that role too. Just throw it in there since we're talking about roles. What do you see as the critical things a sales managers or sales director would do at an agency?
Well, that is my role today, leading a sales team. So from a sales management perspective, there's a couple key components. I would say the first really is the glue between the sales team and the other parts of the business. However you call the services side, service delivery, customer or client success, operations, the difference in a software company, for example, versus an agency is the incredible team that's on the other side of the sale. A lot of times in software, and back in the day before there was a customer success team or before that was a big concept, you get your key after you sign and you say, see you later, we're going to auto renew you in a year. Whereas obviously we're selling a service in the agency world, and that glue and how working together between how we deliver the service and how we sell the service is critical. So that's a main part of the role. The second piece is really, managing and up-leveling and developing the team, right? So being able to understand and see the lead to revenue funnel, identify leaky parts of that funnel. There always is, even if you think there's not, there is. And uncovering areas of opportunity, maximizing on them. The goals of sales leaders are always to increase win rate, money, right? We like that. To obviously, keep great employees. There's an attrition aspect to that of wanting to avoid that and really, maintain and grow new employees, as well as increasing our conversions throughout the funnel where the sales team is involved. And when you have SDRs and AEs, that's the full funnel. So how do we get more people to book initial meetings with us? How do we get more of those meetings to move to the second stage? So there's the strategic aspect, and there's also a very tactical aspect of managing the day-to-day and also being able to roll your sleeves up and jump in. Just last week, I have a rep who was affected by the wildfires in LA. She's fine. Thoughts, prayers to everybody that's affected by that, by the way. And I had to step in and do a pitch for her. Yep. I won it. But,
there you go.
There's times where you got to put your.
You still got it, Karlie. You still got it.
Yeah, so I still got it somewhere in there.
I think. Well, I think this is again like agency owner here, and what happens often with agencies is it goes from agency owner is typically the first salesperson. They do everything. We do everything
That's
because
sales, Carl. It's a
yeah,
thing.
we do all of it, and then all of a sudden we start hiring people to do this, and we don't realize, oh yeah, sales management is part of this as well, because my SDR is incentivized, right? Here's why I think people overlook sales management and why it's so important. So SDR, they're incentivized to get me meetings on like qualified meetings, right? That's their whole goal. Like, sure, they might go help you with a few other things, but primarily their compensation is going to be structured around that. If they're good, they're going to be focused on it. The AE is going to be focused on closing those deals. Great. So you've got those two pieces. But who in that loop right there is in charge of updating our pitch when our services change? Who there is in charge of like deciding that our some of our assets need to be updated because they're a little out of date, or our cold email campaigns are not really like as effective as they once were? These people might have some, if they're really good, they may be somewhat just out of their own benefit interested in helping with that stuff, but they need direction in order to be told that those things are the things they need to work on. And they need incentives, honestly, to align with that. So I think this is where management comes in. It's such a big deal. Of course, you as the agency owner could be the first sales manager, but you just have to be ready to take that on as a job.
Agreed. And I also would add into that as well that I think that, and I'm interested actually in your feedback on this as well. I think that the concept of a defined sales team with focused roles is newer in agency world. And so what we're seeing and what I've seen and what I've done is you actually take folks out of SaaS that are used to that kind of structure, because a lot of the larger SaaS companies, especially the stack vendors, they invest heavily in sales training and enablement, right? And so in that situation, then you have folks that are coming in and maybe bringing more of a sales methodology and more of a sales process structure, which is required for repeatable and predictable pipeline. Agency owners, especially agency founders, every agency I've worked at started as a founder-led motion. Very common, and I think why break what's not broken, right? There's no reason for that. And so there is, I think, sometimes a blind spot to the amount of process that is required and necessary. Agency prospects, clients, we know this, every client's special, right? When you need predictable and repeatable revenue, every client can't be as special. So things like, templated SOWs and, removing bottlenecks or having a straight line of approval and things of that nature are so critical to helping to build that. But that's not part of the founder-led sales motion, understandably so. And so there's a little bit of a shift in mindset that I think is required for agency owners that want to really invest in a predictable sales engine, because it does require to create more of process and structure, where founder-led sales in the agency world, in my opinion or in my experience, has been more unstructured.
Totally. I'm going to add to that because I think this is a huge challenge for agency owners. Here's the pattern I see a lot. Agency owner starts off with founder sales, of course, and that person sells very dynamically and very just based on purely their own knowledge of the service, because they know the service. They built the service themselves. They probably were the expert at that service. So they can sell anything to anybody. They can customize each SOW that goes out because they
sell ice to an Eskimo, right?
Exactly. Right. Right. They're great at that. And they assume that hiring sales will mean hiring another one of them who will have their level of knowledge, expertise, ability to just customize everything to everybody. Absolutely impossible to scale that. Like, I mean, it is unlikely, but possible. You could find someone else within that organization on the service delivery side who will come over, cross over into sales and do that kind of like the founder. Maybe. Very hard. but again, like that's not repeatable, predictable revenue. That's like just somebody who kind of drops in and does founder-led sales for the founder, but it's the same idea. So how do we break free from that, Karlie? And I'm going to, it sounds like you kind of went into an agency and brought this SaaS model in, which I think is great. Now, what went wrong and what went well when doing that?
Well, I'll tell you two different tales. So the first is my first go around at this, which Uh, the key to the initial success of this was the founders' interest in building this model and understanding what the outcome would be of structuring a repeatable sales model. And so we had a lot of success right away. Now, the second component to this is a tactic. If you want to talk about it, find me. I love to discuss this. The gift card campaign within the agency world. Now, maybe it's just in my small agency world, but what we did is we created a marketing campaign through LinkedIn conversation ads using our target account list. So we actually manually cleaned a target account list, which is really important.
I was gonna say that's a whole topic right there. We'll come back to that, but
Yes, we can
continue.
put a pin in that. And we delivered ads only to people that were pre-qualified, right? So we determined the right accounts and then delivered LinkedIn conversation ads. It was a new ad type at the time, a new ad campaign type within LinkedIn. And we saw immediate success. We actually connected Chili Piper right into that flow, or you could do it with another booking tool of your choice so that we could get meetings booked on our calendar. And we offered a gift card for those coming to meet with us. For us, that initial investment made sense because the target account list were people we want to talk to. So we only advertised to certain titles, director level and up. Well,
And the ROI is huge. I mean, again, like an agency sale is a $50,000 engagement, $100,000 engagement.
That's
it's
on the
huge.
low
So,
side.
right,
Absolutely. So all of a sudden, and we tested all the amounts too. If you want to know the secret to that, you can come find me. We all of a sudden our calendars were filled with inbounds, with meetings on our calendar. This was also right when COVID hit, and while that was obviously a tough time for all of us, it was really tough for software because this agency was specifically working with SaaS companies where having an agency is the norm. Everyone has one. And all of a sudden, their lead goals in SaaS were the same, but their budgets were being cut, right? And so they needed extra help and lead gen help. And so we were perfectly positioned to be able to serve that need. And so we were able to build a very repeatable engine where we would do somewhere between 10 and 20 qualification calls a day. And then my AEs would deliver anywhere between 2 and 5 pitches a day. Now, sounds great, right? We're making money, things are wonderful. There's a crucial lesson to this, which is remember the other side of the house. We actually broke the operations team where we could not onboard clients. Now, we did start to figure that out midway through, and we started to create onboarding schedules where we would actually have a certain amount of slots that we could fit in clients as we worked to hire and train strategists. But that is a tale of really high performance from a sales perspective, but not really thinking about the other side of the house as much.
Yeah. Super important because unlike a SaaS, again, we kind of go compare and contrast here, but unlike a SaaS, an agency does not just have that one piece of software they deploy over and over and over again. They have real people who end up thinking through each problem, meeting with each client. There's resources of real people that go and do design work and writing work and whatever. So yeah, it's a good reminder that not that we should be afraid of growth in an agency at all, but just to keep in mind be ready for it.
Right. It's like, make sure there's a word for this that I can't think of. Make sure that you are controlling the volume that's coming through, right? It's perfectly fine to put a boundary around that to support the other side of the house, because guess what? They are your product. And if your product starts to go downhill, then what? Then you start selling a vision that isn't realized or recognized on the other side, right? And we don't want that. That's also not good, right? And so, yes, I agree. We shouldn't be afraid of growth. Growth is out there and growth can be done and has been figured out in other formats, just not naturally adopted by agencies. But that product being our people and taking care of our strategists and the way they operate. We actually at that agency had a limit of the accounts that each strategist could take on. And so we were very thoughtful about that as well. But we had to essentially stop new business for a period of time so that the operations team could catch up.
Yeah. So you talked about a couple things here that I want to circle back to, because I think these are really good observations that, again, a lot of agency owners probably need to think about. First one is that everything can't be customer special if you're going to try to scale up your sales, but I think your service delivery as well. And to your point there, maybe here's the way to ask this question. What does an agency owner need to do before they can start thinking about like scaling up their sales? So in other words, how do we take our services and make them less special? What does that mean to you? Or have you seen this happen in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that process. There's definitely an element to understanding the right process when it comes to, for example, passing a client over, right? Having service delivery operations being tight, I think is one of the first steps. Because the other thing about sales is, especially when you get started, there's going to be ebb and flow. We, in my first agency experience, saw this really quick, which is uncommon. Right place, right time, right campaign, right market, all of the things aligned in that beautiful picture. But that isn't always the case. And I don't think that we can expect as owners of agencies and as sales leaders that that's going to happen every time. That's a rare scenario. So understanding or having that operations piece tight so then you can train or educate the sales folks on that. We don't know what we don't know all the time. And listen, salespeople are a breed in and of itself. Shout out to all my salespeople. But we don't always think about after the signature, because usually that's when, our commission hits and we go on to the next one, right? And so I think a real focus on operations, what that looks like. Then I would work backwards in the sales process, meaning what's the handoff from sales and service delivery look like, right? And making sure that that's really clear so that ultimately the client experience doesn't suffer throughout that journey, but also understand that things are going to go wrong and that's okay. And that's part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Something I always like to ask agency owners when I'm meeting them is like, what kind of work do you say no to? Like, just because sometimes people will say, yeah, we'll help you with any of your marketing needs. And I'm like, what? That's not fucking helpful. That's like, that's just like, you're just telling me you can do anything, but which means you can't do anything very well. So really trying to narrow in on, I think to me, one of the keys is, as an agency owner, defining your services that you will do and do really well, and intentionally being like, and these are the things we just don't do, and making sure that you know those things and you're really committed to that no list before you bring in a salesperson. Because like you said, a salesperson will say yes to anything. Like, they don't have to go service it. Like they want to close the deal and get the commission. Like
I deal with this all the time. And
Yep.
It's such a good point. No one wants a jack of all trades and master of none. Specialization is actually really important, and why founder-led sales really can't be scaled. I can't get the information out of your brain that you know from building a company from the ground up. It's just not possible, right? And so really honing in as an agency on what you're really good at. And guess what? A lot of companies use multiple agencies. It's okay to not tackle the full thing or eat the whole pie. Just cut out the pieces that you really want and you're really good at, because then you know that you're going to drive results, which ultimately is the product, right? I think traps we can fall into is when you have sales that's maybe selling a wide variety, but then that product, that service does not meet those expectations, or there's misalignment there, because ultimately that affects the customer experience and that client's going to churn. And some agencies don't even actually start to profit off of a client until year 2. So that first year is critical to prevent churn and, from the metrics of a growth standpoint for an organization.
Totally. Yeah, I love it. This is hitting me where I see all the same problems. I love it. So the other thing you mentioned, which I think really is, honestly, it's a very similar message of niching down, is this target account list. I love that idea. And somebody introduced that to me back probably when I first started my first agency, and I kind of adopted that, and we built a list of 200 or 300 companies that we were like, these are the A tier companies we would want to work with in our space. Tell me more about like what a target account list might look like for companies you've seen in your experience, and then how do we start to build that?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics. So, target account lists, I think, coincide very frequently to the concept of ABM or account-based marketing. At least today, they're very much coincided. I actually have a little bit of a different opinion. I think account-based marketing, I had a wonderful CMO who taught this to me many years ago, Samantha Stone. Um, Account-based marketing is actually a company-wide initiative. What that means to me is that from top down, the company agrees upon certain accounts that you want to go after, and every single part of the business in some aspect is supporting that. Meaning a CEO is connecting to the CEO of that company and sending them a note. Somebody from the product team goes to some event to meet with their product team. We're sending direct mail. We've got SDRs reaching out, marketing's hitting other people, right? It's a really surround the account. Target account list, I think, is a watered down version of that because sometimes companies can't align to really support that type of strategy. And so we have target account list. Target account list, I think the first thing that you really want to think about there is your total addressable market. So what's that big list of companies that you want to go after, and how big or small is that list? I think it's important to do that activity. A lot of companies miss it. And that is more about who are the companies, less about who you want to sell, who are your best customers.
Yeah. I think it's a fear thing, that the reason people don't put this together. I think a lot of, and I'm been there and I am there. I'm an agency owner. Like, I'm afraid of things too. So I think like this fear that like, if I have this intentional list who I'm like, really focused in on, then I'll lose all those other accounts that might come in organically or referrals that might come in. Like, that's not true, A. But B, it's just really helpful to circle the wagons and center around a very small group of clients. Because I think, again, a lot of people think like, well, if that list is only 100 or 200 companies, like, it's too small to do like high volume outreach and all this stuff. Like, you don't need that though in an agency, right? Like, what do we need? Like 20 to 50 clients is like a pretty good size agency for most of us. Like, you don't need that many.
100%. And also, why say no to the other stuff?
Right, absolutely.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both.
It's not one or the other. That's right.
And so that's where specialization comes into play as well. So once you kind of address that total addressable market piece, and then you start to whittle down, and again, I really, I caution, it's not the companies you want to sell, it's the companies that are your best clients. I want to sell to Target. If anyone from Target is listening, I want to sell to Target. Why? I spend half my paycheck there. I love Target, right?
You want the discount, yeah.
Right. Are they the best fit for my agency? No, right? So it's more about like analyzing the best current clients you have to come up with some demographic and behavioral signals that you can then translate over into some type of data tool to make a lookalike list, right? The ZoomInfo, Apollo, whatever data tool that you utilize. But here's the kicker. You export that list, you have to manually clean it. I'll say it again, you have to manually clean it. And it is going to be terrible and it's going to be awful. We had about 9,000 on the list that we pulled from the data tools, and we spent weeks. We cut off different tabs, like you clean 500, you clean 500. We whittled it down to under 4,000. So data tools are about 50 to 55% inaccurate based on what you're thinking that it needs to look like. But then you know that every account, there's no wasted spend when you're advertising to companies that you actually have already identified are pre-qualified. And that's really where the magic comes, but it takes a little bit of groundwork.
It does, for sure. Yeah, I think we use Apollo as well, and it's a great starting point. Like, I'll give you a really tactical example. I've been looking for podcast, audio, and video production companies, let's call them. As I built a list of audio, video production companies in Apollo, it says it's 2,700 companies. I start looking through it, and it's a lot of radio stations and things that are like very old school media, like TV show producers and stuff that I'm like, oh, that's not useful. And there's no automated way, unfortunately, with their given list of filters to really get down to what I was looking for. And so we end up having to go through 2,700 or so things and find the 100 or so that were actually really, really good fits and really the right, stuff. So it is work, but it's super, once you've built it, the nice thing is it's probably going to be good for a year or two in most industries. I mean, there's going to be some variability, but it's going to be there. It's a long-term asset. And then you can always expand it or change it later, right? Like this is but it enables so many things like you've been talking about, Karlie, the targeted ads, the ability to do cold outreach that's very personal. Like if you build a list of 200 companies, you could it would not be hard conceivably to spend 5 minutes per email actually writing them personally.
No, absolutely not. And if you don't have the capacity to clean it, start anyway. Like not saying start cleaning it, like just start advertising, or maybe you take a couple out of it, or you cut it in half or something like that. And then if you start to get garbage leads coming in the top, then likely that it's the targeting of that list. But getting the motion started is so critical.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about getting started, because this was actually I'm going to get real tactical here, but I think one of the common things we see, again, both of us, is agency owners been doing all the sales themselves, and they're like, okay, I got to get out of this. It's burning me out. They're like, they're overseeing, or like at least they have some thumbs in service delivery. Maybe they're really the one who answers all the sales booking calls, and they have to get every client passed over to production and to get them working. Where do they start? Because presumably at that stage, they're not big enough to hire a full-on sales team and sales manager. Where's the little bits they can start with? What can they start to get off their plate to get themselves elevated out of sales?
That's a great point. I'll tell you where I've seen it, and then maybe also give some other ideas. So where I've seen that second step outside of founder-led sales is the salesiest person in service delivery. Now, I've seen that be really effective. Is it ideal to grab somebody that maybe not is necessarily in a sales type role? Now, granted, I do think that there are many strategists out there that are not given nearly enough credit for their sales ability. Keeping clients, keeping them happy, all of that, renewals, that is all sales. That's relationship building, right? And I have seen, many instances where there is a superstar that's doing account work that has a more sales type of personality. And that person kind of gets tagged as the first salesperson to learn from the founder. And I think that's okay. As long as the person's okay with that and that's what they want to do, then great, do that. But that also only goes so far. Because then they start to get overloaded, and then, you start to end up needing more people, but hopefully that's in the name of growth, and that's how it should look. I think that one of the things that I would recommend to agency owners is to recognize where the leads are coming from relationships and then where they aren't. So that's the other aspect of it, is I think that the reason why founder-led sales also works really well is you just build relationships, and then you lean on those relationships, and those relationships have other relationships, and then all of a sudden you've got a business, right? And so there is an aspect to that I think sometimes when you do bring on a sales team or a seller, you forget about that. And then you can go back to that or keep that moving kind of in the background. But then I think it's really the agency then determining how are we bringing ourselves to market then? And that's where marketing function comes in. And then you start to have leads, and then who's handling those, right? And so really going through that process of determining that and what that looks like and how quickly you want to scale some of that positioning and positioning within the market and things like that is important to consider.
Yeah. I'll tell you the way that I went about it. And again, there's no one way to do this, but like everybody's got a different method. So the way I went about it was, first of all, when I started the first company, like the offerings we had were super limited. Like we did one content package for one fixed price. It was very minimal. Right. And, so that made it easy to sell for me and for anybody who came in. The second thing was, like, I had to make sure I actually had enough lead flow, like deal flow coming, that someone was going to be busy if they're going to take over sales calls. Like I think there's another like misconception in agency owners, like sales versus marketing. So if you have one call a week with a potential customer, you have a marketing problem, not a sales problem. Like just because you don't have enough calls on your books. When you have 10, 20 calls a week, you might have good marketing, but now you may have more of the sales problem. So like you basically, like, to me, the logical answer was get myself so booked that I can't take more sales calls and I'm pushing people out 2 or 3 weeks. I need to hire a salesperson, right? Like it's clear. And now I've hopefully narrowed my service down to like one little thing we sell. And I'm going to then, and I think you kind of just alluded to this, I'm going to then take in certain calls I will take because they are people who I personally knew, or like there's maybe a big high value client. I want to be on that one, but I'll give them the lower tier of calls to start with. And then I'll eventually work them into the bigger deals too. And like eventually they take over.
And
so there was a whole,
right? Learn.
Yeah. Yep. There's a whole pattern there. And like, again, it worked fairly well, but I think for me, the strength was we had the discipline to cut down to just offering one very specific service. I think that's hard for a lot of agencies. A lot of creative agencies that are very open-ended in their servicing, is probably impossible to follow that same model. Like there's probably got to be a different way to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I also think that you're illuminating the point on packaging as well, because a lot of times I think obviously at the front end of the sales cycle and what that looks like. And I think this is probably where I was trying to go earlier when was talking about process and really locking down process within service delivery. With that is pricing and packaging too. So custom pricing, custom packaging, while I think there's probably likely always a custom scenario out there that will always listen and consider, having clear pricing and packaging also then allows you to scale both on the service delivery side as well as on the sales side too. And nailing that down is important. And if you are an agency that has multiple services, which is great, what are the priority of those? So for example, the current level agency shout out that I'm currently building the sales team for, our bread and butter is paid media. Are there other services that we provide? Yes, except it has to be in some way coupled with or in partner with paid media management in some aspect. Now, that focus and specialization then allows us to grow as a real leader within that space within certain industries, right? And so then our messaging and our positioning is all around that growth and that success, though we do have ancillary services that we are able to offer. It just isn't packaged necessarily in that same way. And so if you do have multiple services, I think that's fantastic, but think about really what's the core service that you want to then surround other services to?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. The way I think about branding for an agency is I want to be able to concisely get into, we do X for Y, and it is one thing for one kind of persona. Now, you're, again, like you said, like, of course we do paid media and we also sometimes do some, X, Y, and Z things, that's fine. But like, if you could just distill it down to we do X for Y, what is that? And how specific are the X and Y? Again, the more specific it is, the easier it is to brand yourself that way. And when I say branding, it's like what I want to be able to do, Karlie, is every time I have a conversation with somebody like you, Karlie, or random other person that I have a conversation with, I want to be able to tell them, yeah, I run an agency that does X for Y. If you meet anybody in that category, feel free to send them my way. And now they don't put me in the category of, oh, Carl runs an agency. Like, put you way back in the back burner because nobody thinks about that. They're like, oh, Carl runs a very specific kind of agency. And now when they do hear about somebody who needs that, it's going to be a very clear introduction because they've never heard such a specific pitch for what a company does.
No, that's so, and I'll share an example. I have one. So because we went through this at Level, and our tagline, our positioning is we do performance marketing in complex environments. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means paid media is our bread and butter, though we do some other performance marketing as well and have other services and creative team and all that fun stuff. And we really do well in complex environments where there's maybe a lot of different platforms, there's a lot of different data. We have to help normalize that data as well as complex sales cycles, not something where the business, is maybe B2C and you're, buying something immediately. This is a lead led type of sales process. And the marketers that we work with are incentivized on generating marketing generated leads, pipeline, and revenue for sales cycles where you actually have a seller that, walks somebody and leads somebody through that process.
Yeah, and it's great because like when you say like for a complicated sales process, you can now pick like 2 or 3 industries that have really complicated sales processes, and you can really narrow down like who you're gonna target.
And that's where focus and specialization really plays well.
Yep. I would suspect that the majority of agencies, just based on my experience with them, have more of a marketing problem than a closing sales problem in general. Because I think most of them don't really do much active marketing. Most of what they do is like take referrals where they get them, and go to a few industry events a year and show up, shake hands, and you get some new business, right? And yeah. And look, I mean, that's all good stuff, right? Like we all want referrals. Like I want referrals because it means we're doing good work and our clients like us and they're sending them, But I don't want to rely solely on referrals because it's an extremely dangerous place to be because, you're all of a sudden, a few of those dry up and it's just very unpredictable. Going back to your very first point about predictability. So what are some of the tactics that agencies can start with? You already mentioned the gift card, like, target list, sort of building LinkedIn ads and towards the gift cards or some kind of offer. I think that's a great one. Any other tactics, Karlie, that you kind of put at the top of the list to keep in mind or just start testing maybe?
A couple different ways I've seen this and I'm going to give widely different examples because I think it can be relevant for different size agencies. So one in particular, which is kind of what we're doing right now, is a founder-led lead gen thing, for lack of a better term. For example, at Level, we have on our executive team, Chris Mechanic, and he does a podcast. And through that podcast, he talks with a ton of SaaS leaders, and some of them are interested in having a conversation with us after the podcast so that we have this general, thing that's going there. Another interesting thing to consider is, do you have agency friends that do other things? And can you become referral partners back and forth? So one thing that we have done as well is really have defined our minimum spend for paid media and the companies that we work best in based on what they're spending. And if we come across companies that don't have that spend, we have, other agencies that we know do great work, who we love, that we pass them over to. So that could be another kind of partnership type referral model. If you're looking at lead gen as, traditional digital marketing, I think the first step is actually determining tone and methodology. The key differentiator of every agency is how you do the service. And I really define that as methodology. And so how do you explain to somebody why your services are better than others? So starting with that concept and really building then the tone and the brand of the organization, and then, creating some simple ads in which you can, whether it be through Google, whether it be even on Meta or LinkedIn. I think part of the target account list and total addressable market activity is also understanding your ideal customer profile. So finding out where they spend their time on the internet is really important. And then you can start some very small campaigns with small investments wherever your target clients spend their time and live online. And then, there's all our traditional good old direct mail and billboards. And sometimes there is space for that. Sometimes TV ads and programmatic could also play a part. It depends on the agency itself, but really find out where your target market lives. And that should be your first place to go to do some testing of advertising.
Yeah, I love it. I think, again, it kind of keeps boiling back to this target account list and really narrowing down what you do. We keep saying it, but I think it's so critical, and it makes everything else easier is maybe the reason to do it. Because I was just talking and it kind of makes the tactics obvious. Like we're kind of hinting at here. Like I was talking to a guy earlier today who was marketing agency for a client trying to reach what was it? It was cabinet makers, under $1 million in, like $1 or $2 million in sales or something like that, like totally random, right? But this was like who they wanted to sell to and who they wanted to reach. These are guys he tells me the demographic information. These are 55-year-old former construction guys living in small towns. Like they are not on Facebook, or they're not hanging out there like looking for whatever, right? Like it was very different from like how, again, like a lot of us think of reaching our customers. Yeah. I mean,
seriously.
They end up doing a bunch of cold calls and mailing campaigns. And like, that's where these guys operate on the phone. They all have a phone number. They pick up the phone when their customers call, and they all have mailboxes because they have physical locations. They're building cabinets. And like, those tactics were obvious. They weren't on LinkedIn. They weren't hanging out on Facebook. They were, they weren't the people. Maybe a billboard would have made sense if they were all at a convention or something. I don't know. But yeah, but it all comes back to like, you got to know who these people are really, really well. And then it gets easy.
Another great example of that is logistics. I used to sell to freight forwarders. They're not on LinkedIn. Some of them are on Facebook, but not many. And so my cold calling conversion rate for my SDRs was the highest it's ever been, because freight forwarders answer the phone. Because if you want to ship something, they are there to help you. And we were super successful converting over the phone. And that's, don't disregard any channel. Just really be open to what your target market's channels are, no matter what demographic they are.
Totally. Karlie, this has been a ton of fun. I'm sure we could keep talking for hours because we're both talkers and we like sales. But I'll let you move on with your day. I have one final question I always ask everybody. It's what are you reading lately, or what have you read in the last year or two that's been impactful for you? You've kind of made a difference on either your professional or your personal life.
So it's a book that's right behind you, which is Traction, which is the EOS structure. If you're not familiar, it is an operating structure for, I think, smaller businesses generally. And I had never come across EOS before in my experience. It's not a SaaS thing, right? It's very much an agency thing. And the structure of EOS has really changed the way I work, and I love it. If you're an EOS fan, we got our L10s on my team. We got our rocks for the quarter. We're running at them. But circling around that type of internal cultural, methodology at an organization is so important. And I've just been fascinated by it. So
I love it. Yeah, EOS is great. I think anything that gives you so many small businesses just they don't have a guiding goal or template, right, for like running everything and running everything towards a specific goal and keeping an eye on why everything contributes to that goal. This stuff sounds simple, but it's actually kind of hard to like build a system that works really well like this. And something off the shelf like EOS, great way to just get it. Like, you read the book, you pick out the majority. You probably don't even have to follow it 100%, but at least get the majority
what's right for your business. But it gives you a framework of operating in a way that drives accountability, in a way that drives, goals and achieving those goals, but also gives you room to make mistakes and to talk about them. I really enjoy the structure, and I would agree with you. It's hard to start a business. Kudos to all of you listening that have. It is massively difficult. Take something that can help you from a framework perspective to kick it off, because not everyone is going to be excellent at everything, and that's okay. Figure out the areas where you can use a structure.
Oh, I love it. Karlie, where can people follow up or find more about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn using my maiden last name. It's Morien, Morien. And I work for Level Agency. Search me on there. You'll find me. Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to chat with anybody and share things that have worked for me.
Thank you, Karlie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is so fun.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.